that I can compare the prices.
Yeah. If you did
It's amazing.
main search.
Yeah, I'm going to this. I'm like, okay. And you know what I found?
A lot of the prices, some prices are marked up, but a lot are the same as in the store. They say it says.
There are the same as
it tells you.
Okay, we're live.
Oh, we're live.
We're going. You
Talking
could,
about Instacart.
yeah. No, if anybody wants to know more about Instacart, people.
So we have some extras.
Okay, hi everyone out there.
I can zoom.
No,
You
we
can also do it from home. You
Facebook,
see, I mean,
but they
not
can't see us.
they only see me at the moment.
It's just
Vayikach Haman es halavush ve'es hasus. So Haman goes to Mordechai with the king's clothing and the king's horse. Azal ve'ashkach rabbanan v'yasve kamei Mordechai. This is the Gemara in Megillah. He went and he found the rabbanan sitting and studying Torah with Mordechai. V'kamechavi lehilchos kmitza l'rabbanan. Since it was Pesach time, he was showing them the laws of how to do kmitza, which is part of the korban sacrifices with the omer and so forth. And he was showing them how to do a certain mitzvah, because whenever you can't perform the mitzvah, if there's no Beis HaMikdash, so then you try to learn about it. And Haman arrives. Even the Chazi and Mordechai, when Mordechai saw Haman coming, to Afik lekable, coming to greet him, Vesuse mechad biyade, with his horse along with him, dancing next to him, whatever it was. So Mirtas, Mordechai was petrified. Amar lahu the Rabbana, he said to the Rabbana, Hai Rishia lemikdal nafshi kasi. That wicked man is coming to kill me. Zilu mikame, get out of here. Dilo techavu begachalti, so you don't get burnt with my gachelet. In other words, why should you get burnt with my coal? I'm going to get burnt, fine. He's after me, I can't get away. Get out of here. Don't be innocent bystanders. So Mordechai, thought the worst was coming. He shaita. Now, at that moment, Nisatev Mordechai v'kamle litzalusa. As soon as Haman arrived, Mordechai quickly got up and started davening Shemona Esrei. Also Haman came in, v'yosef lekamai, and waited patiently for him. V'orech ad desalik Mordechai litzalusa. And Mordechai took a long time. He took a long Shemona Esrei, and Haman had to sit there. Now, why did he do this? Why did Haman wait? Why not disrupt him? So one of the Mefarshim says, because he knew he was going to be giving him good news. He knew that if he sees him, he's seeing him with bad news, right? Mordechai sees Haman coming, it's bad news, until Haman says, actually, I'm here to give you a horsey ride, right? And give you nice clothes and parade you through the streets. So it was going to be a great story. So he wanted Mordechai to daven Shemona Esrei without any joy. Because even Haman understood that prayer with joy is essentially a dagger in his heart. That's what Sifsei Chacham says. And therefore, he specifically went out of his way to make his prayer out of anguish instead of out of joy. That's why he waited, to not disrupt him. Okay? Amar le b'maya siktu. When he finished, he said, what are you guys studying? So in the Midrash, it says that the other rabbis who were there said, if you die, we'll die, but we're not leaving you. Like a Ruth and Naomi type of moment. They said, no way, we're not going anywhere. So they were still all sitting around after. As soon as he sat back down, Haman said, what are you guys studying? Amalei, Dechichava Beis HaMikdash Kaim, when the temple was around, Rachmana Amar, God told us, Man de mindav mincha, leise mal yakum tse mimena. Person who donates a korban mincha, here's how you do the komets, where you take, 4 of the fingers and you leave the pinky out. V'liktar al gabe madbacha, and it's offered on the mizbeach. V'lich barlei, and then the person is forgiven. Amarle, he said to him, Asa mala kumtza de kimcha didchu. It looks like your little handful of flour was more effective than asara alfe kikre kaspada hugaver, than the tens of thousands of dollars that I spent unsuccessfully, attacking the Jews. Okay. Amarle Russia. So Mordechai said to him, you wicked man. He spoke strongly to him. Avda dekana nechasim, avda deman, nechasim deman. When a slave acquires things, do they belong to him? What do you mean it was your money? Yeah, so one of the understandings is Mordechai was saying, "You're really my slave," because of some old story that they had between one another. Um, okay, now here's where it gets really exciting. Amar like kum levush hani mani. Haman told him, "Okay, it's time to get up and put on these clothes." The king demanded. V'rochiv hayasusi, and you got to ride on this horse. The kaboy lach malka. The king insisted. Amar lei, he said, "Leichon, I can't. Adazilma lebei bani. I have to go to the merchatz. I got to go to the spa first. He was benivul. He was sitting in sackcloth, right? And he was fasting. He wasn't showering. So he says, I first have to wash myself off before I put on these clothes for the king. Ve'eshkol lemazoi. I have to get a haircut. I mean, I'm completely disheveled. Delav orach ara. It is not derech eretz. It's not appropriate lishtamushe b'mani d'malchus to use the king's clothing in a state like this. Adahachi v'hachi. Now, as this was happening, Esther anticipated this. Shadra Esther ve'asartinu l'kuli be'bani. Esther had every person who ran the bathhouses arrested.
Oh.
Some commentaries say it means she locked them up, the bathhouses up. But Rashi learns that she had the people arrested. Ula kule umne, and also it says here to all the barbers. So there was a day that no barbers allowed, and no. I don't know if that's going to do so much. Is it? Oh, it's just the smoke. Okay, you decide. The cover won't keep the smoke in. It's just. Ayla iulebe. You could pull it forward. Ayla iulebe bani. So Haman had to take him himself to wash him. In other words, in those days, you had someone to wash your feet and do the whole thing. Haman had to become the bathhouse attendant. And he scrubbed him. He washed him. Azal I say zuza mi bese. He then went and got a pair of scissors from his house because shaka lemazye, and he gave him a haircut. So Haman is it's like Corona time, right? Like can't find a person to give you a haircut. Basar de kashakele ingad ve'isnach. He nearly fainted. Then he groaned. Haman was very distressed by this experience. Amalei, am I coming nachas? So Mordechai says to him, what's wrong, sweetheart? Amalei, Gavra de choshev le'lemalka mikulu ravra. The man who is most valuable to the king from all the great ones, from all the princes, from all the lords, Hashta l'shavye balani v'sapar, has turned into a bathhouse attendant and a hairstylist. Amalei Russia, he said, you idiot, you wicked man. Lav sapar bekvar kartzon. I know where you came from. For 22 years, you were the barber in Kfar Kartsum. So you think that you're too good for this. This is your actual job. So in other words, Esther needed him. Why did Esther, in other words, Esther arranged, right? She knew Mordechai, there's no way he's going to do this if it's not derech eretz. So he's going to need a haircut. Let's make sure there's no other way to get a haircut except Haman's going to have to do it. Tana, this is a teaching that we learned in our Masorah, right? In the Brises. This goes back to the times of the Mishnah. They used to teach children the following important lesson. Haman sapar shel kvar kartzum haven. Esrim v'shnayim shana. For 22 years, Haman was a professional barber. Who cares, right? Okay. Basar de ishkil le lemazye alvashe. So he gives him a haircut. He gets him dressed. Amalei slick rechov. Get up and ride the horse. Amalei lo yachon. He says, I can't. I'm very weak from my fasting. Kachish cheloi mitanisa. My strength is very weak from the fast. Gachin leverochiv. So he bent over and he climbed on his back and got up on the horse. As Mordechai was getting up, Batash Bey. Boom! He kicked him. He gave him a solid kick in the ribs or something. Amalei, he said, wait a minute. Viloksiv, don't you Jews teach binfol oyevcha al tismach? Don't you guys teach that when your enemy is falling down, you shouldn't rejoice? Amalei, Russia, you Russia. Hani mili be Yisrael. That's only about other Jews. Only be Yisrael. Oyvecha Yisrael. Oyivcha, if it's another fellow Jew, then you don't rejoice. Aval b'didchu, but people like you, ksiv, it says in the Torah, ve'ata al bamotemo tidroch. You will trample upon their high places, on their bummas, on their stages. You'll be very... So Mordechai gave him a big kick out of joy when he climbed up on his back. He had no mercy for this Nazi the grandfather of this Hitler Haman. Vikar vayikra lefanav. So now Haman calls out before him, Kacha yeyasela ish. So should be done to the man. Ki havanaketz va'ozil b'shvila divei Haman. When they were going down the shvil, the path near the house of Haman's street, Chazye Barte, his daughter, was on the roof. Kaima be'igra, she was standing on the roof, and she saw her father coming by. Sovra Haide Rochiv Avuhu, the one riding the horse was her father. V'Haide Maski Kamei Mordechai, and the one running in front was Mordechai. She had it backwards. Shakla Atzitza de Beit HaKisei. She took the bedpan, the chamber pot, from the toilet. V'Shadyale Aresha de Avua, and threw it onto the head of what turned out to be her father. Doli Eine, he looked up through the feces to see who had done this to him. V'chazye de Avua have, and he saw her, and she saw that it was her father. Nafla me'igra mesa, she was so startled she fell off the roof and died. Some people like to tell the story that she jumped off the roof deliberately, but the Gemara says she slipped. It sounds like she fell accidentally out of shock. It's a fantastic story. In fact, the Eitz Yosef says that the Midrash, this Gemara, is based on the Midrash and the Targum, where the Targum also says that Haman really wanted his daughter to marry the king. But Hashem didn't want that to happen. So he took this otherwise probably very beautiful girl, sounds like she was in the running, and gave her a horrible stomach condition where she could not control her bowels for very long. So she constantly had to have some sort of chamber pot. She couldn't even make it to a bathroom. And so she was so smelly all the time that they threw her out of the palace. That's what the Targum says about Haman's daughter. So the Eitz Yosef says that's why she had a thing with her right there, filled, because she had diarrhea constantly for years. It's hysterical. I mean, these details are... You find in general in the Purim story that there's a tremendous, and this is really what I want to talk about. Besides for all the specific details in this story, there's an irony in the joy that we have at the downfall. Welcome. At the downfall of Haman, and the joy that the way the stories are told. I mean, it's just too funny when you read it. She's dropping the toilet on his head. I don't even know. Our children were always taught in school, they teach it was the garbage.
The garbage, yes.
Why not teach them it was the toilet? I mean, it was. They'll just find that really funny. Like, I doubt they're going to go do it. We don't have chamber pots anymore. I'm not sure why we're hiding this from the children. Like, even as an adult, it's almost childishly funny that Haman is walking down the street, humiliated, and then it just gets worse and worse. The Midrashim, when they describe, or the Gemara says that Haman is building this tree. So he wants to make this tree 50 amas tall because that's when Achashverosh looks out, he'll see it. Because that's where Achashverosh is positioned. And he knows Achashverosh is very impulsive. So Melech Hafach V'chan, is how the Gemara says. He was hofech, he changed his mind all the time. Very fickle. So 1 minute he'll just get mad and say, yeah, fine, I'll kill Mordechai. So he built this tree exactly at this height. And then he didn't know if it's going to fit him or not. It's going to fit a person's head. Like, is it done right? So he measured it on himself to make sure, right? I mean, he's like literally preparing everything for his own downfall. So that's where we get started with the following train of thought. To figure out, are we happy? The Gemara says that Mordechai gave him a kick. It was such a joy. How exactly do we relate to this? So this is the Sefer Pachad Yitzchak from Rav Hutner. And he says something so interesting. Really good. He says, the people of Amalek are contrasted to Yisro in the Midrash. Yitro. The Midrash says, quotes a pasuk in Mishlei which says, Letz takeh upeti ya'arim. A letz, you need to smack. He'll get beaten. And a pesi, a foolish, a simple, foolish person, will be given arama, will be given cunning, will be given sophistication and wisdom. So leitz take, but peti ya'arim. So leitz take is Amalek. We have a mitzvah to hit Amalek. Amalek is the letz. Letz is the cynic, the scoffer. And the pesi, the fool, simple person, will be given wisdom. This is Yisro. So that in the Torah, first it's the story of Amalek and then the story of Yisro. Amalek comes to do what's called leitzonus. Leitzonus is cynicism. It's poking fun at things that deserve to be treated seriously. And the question is, where do you see that in Amalek? Like, were they making jokes? Do you understand? Like, where do you see that in the behavior of Amalek exactly? So he says as follows. He says there's a Gemara. Gemara says, Kol leitzanusa asira, all scoffing, making fun of things, belittling things is prohibited, with the exception of the leitzanut of Avodah Zarah. Making fun of Avodah Zarah, that's permitted. That's a good idea. So you should make fun of people that believe in, the person themselves, maybe you can sometimes spare. It depends on the person. Not every person, walk up to them for sure. But it's absurd to believe in the virgin birth and the Trinity. It's just outrageous. And jokes at their expense are fantastic. In the Gemara, they would make up names for all the different Avodah Zarahs. So, Beit Galia, Beit Tami, they would make fun, like plays on words, to make the name, of the one that was talking. It was like the House of Waves would be like the House of Dead Bones. They would make a joke every time they talked about it to belittle the people that worshipped idols. You should make fun of the religion where they drink each other's urine. Like, make fun of this stuff. It's funny, right? And why? So Rav Hutner says, there are two things in Hebrew. There's Hilul and Chilul. Hilul is to enthusiastically praise things that deserve praise. Koach ha-hilul and koach ha-chilul. To praise something that deserves praise is an achievement. To be mechalel something is to take something from a place of prestige and belittle it. Chilul Hashem, right? Chilul Shabbos, right? It's to belittle the importance of something. But sometimes something is put in the complete wrong place, like Avodah Zarah. When you take a false idea, right? I'm not saying this all specifically because it's International Women's Day, right? Hashtag, break the bias or something, right? I'm not saying because of that. Even though the definition of the day is that every single person in the world has a bias that they can't control, and I kind of resent that. But I'm not saying it because of that, right? Whatever the subject is that's being elevated to the heavens, you have to put it in its appropriate place. And so just as it's important to take important things and put them where they belong and not belittle those important things, it's equally important to take things that are being made to be important in the center of the universe and put them in their appropriate place. And therefore, when we say leitzanut, when we say making a mockery of something is prohibited, well, that's only true about important things. So leitzanut of Avodah Zarah is just as important as treating the important things with the gravitas and the respect that they deserve. It's just as important to be able to crack a joke about the things that are not so serious and need to be taken down a peg. It is very, very dangerous to say we treat every ideology and every belief with the utmost respect here. No. The belief in Hashem giving the Torah at Sinai is not the same as that urine drinking one. It's not the same. They're morons, and the men are people are getting sick from the estrogen. It's just not good, that religion where they drink the urine. That's a real thing in Africa. It's a crazy thing. And you should make fun of it. And you should, okay. Only, there's a deeper level too. You see, here's the pasuk in Parak Chav Zayin of Mishlei. It says, Matzreif lekesef, the kur lezahav. There's a crucible for silver, and there's some sort of furnace for the gold. The ish, and for a person, kifi mahalolo. Ish lefi mahalolo. Let's say this again. Silver has a way that it's refined and defined can tell, and so does gold. And how about people? How do you define people? How do you figure out a person? How do you measure a person? Lefi mahalolo, according to his praises. Okay, so here's step number one. Simple pshat. For example, the Meiri brings this pshat. The Meiri says, based upon what people say about a person, you can tell a lot about that person. As an example, if you were to call people up, let's say it's time for shidduchim. Somebody says, I got a great girl for your son. You say, okay. They send you a list of names. They say, here's her roommate, and here's her friend, and here's someone else. Call, make some calls, find out if it sounds like a match. And if it sounds good to you, I'll arrange a date. So you say, okay, great idea. So what do? You call people up and say, is this girl a nice kid? They say, yes. Does she perform kindness? Sure. Is he a good boy? Great. Does he go to yeshiva on time? Always. Right? That's what you're going to get if you ask a series of yes or no questions. But if you say to 4 different people, tell me about this person, and they all say, the person is remarkably sweet and calm all the time. They say this person, or all 4 of them, within one of the first 2 or 3 things they say about the person, super outgoing, super friendly, super cheerful, right? They give you that. You can basically know it's true. If you ask, are they cheerful, and 25 people say yes, meaningless. But if you just let people talk about someone, and this is relevant for a lot of different things. If you're on the search committee and they're looking for a new assistant rabbi, whatever you're doing, if you use this tactic and you just talk to 3-4 people who know the person and say, just talk, and then you shut your mouth, you just listen. I say, and you ask another totally open-ended questions, let them talk, and then line up. What did I hear from these 3, 4, 5 people? It's all the same thing. You know it's true. That's a very, very good tactic when it comes to shidduchim. When it comes to making calls to find out about someone, you'll find out what you need to know pretty fast if you just are quiet. So ish lefi mahalo, this is a very important tactic. Let other people talk, and when a number of things line up, you're probably getting a good picture of how they present themselves. But Rabbeinu Yonah says something different. Rabbeinu Yonah is a whole different level. He says ish lefi mahalolo, imhu mishabeach hamaasim hatovim. Ish lefi mahalalo means a person is defined by what they praise about others. You're defined by your values, what you value and what you praise, not necessarily what people say about you or even what you do. In other words, you could do it very little, but what you really value and you really praise, that defines you. Means, if a person praises good behavior, and he values wise people and righteous people, Teda uvachanta, know that you've just figured out ki ish tovu, that's a good man. V'shorish hatzedek nimtza bo, goodness is in him. V'im yitachen sheyesh biyado avonot nistarim, maybe this person has some hidden sins. I mean, what you see on the outside, maybe it's not their whole story. Avol me'ohavei hatzedeku, you still can know that this person loves goodness. But a person who praises the bad stuff and supports the wicked is a truly wicked person. Rabbeinu Yonah goes on, he says that from the Goyim already agreed to this by calling a person who loves wisdom, right, a wise person. They use the term philosopher or philosophy. Now, philo means to love, right, like bibliophile, right, and sophos is sophistication, right, wisdom. So a person who loves wisdom, that's the most important thing. He says they got that one right. And he says in Pirkei Avot, that's what it means. Ezahu chacham halomed mikol adam. If a person is interested to learn, that makes them wise. Even if they can't retain all of it, and they don't know what, a person who's interested to learn from any person, that's wisdom. Rav Hutner then says something incredible. Yitachen shelefanenu shnei bnei adam. It's possible to have before you 2 people. Ha'echad osek b'Torah b'shkida u'behatmada. One person engages in Torah study regularly, he's consistent, and he's diligent. The other person is busy working for a living, he's not an osek b'Torah. He has a few minutes a day to learn. Despite that, motzim anu etzel harishon tnuah shel hisbatlus b'shah shenichnas elav asher gadol. When a very wealthy person comes in, this guy who's learning the whole day is like, wow, a rich man. And when a Talmid Chacham comes his way, Ein hu zaz mi makomo. He doesn't move an inch. It doesn't impress him. U'umat zot, on the other side of the coin, you'll find that the other person, when he meets a Torah scholar, can't get over what a deep and meaningful experience this is for him to speak to such a person. He says, Rabbeinu Yonah tells us that even though the first guy knows Shas, the second person is wiser than him. The second person is closer to Torah than the first person, despite the first person learning all day. He says you could have two people who spent their youth, one of them spent his youth learning Torah, but kind of regrets it. He wishes he had gone to college and made some money when he was younger. And the other guy, Lohis, is terribly regrets that he didn't spend time in yeshiva. He says the second one, Hasheni Korov Yoser Harbe LaTorah Me'asher Rishon. The person who loves it is closer than the first one. You know, in the blessing for Birkas HaTorah, so it says, all of a sudden, V'nei anachnu v'tze'etzaenu, we and our descendants, our grandchildren, everybody should be learning Torah and loving it. You don't find that really with any other bracha. We don't say, thank you, Hashem, heal the sick, and us and our children and our grandchildren. You don't really find us putting that in specifically, except for in the blessing of the Torah, where we're talking about making the Torah sweet for us. So there's a sefer that just recently came out from Rabbi Aaron Feldman. Over Corona, Rabbi Aaron Feldman is the Rosh Hashiva in Ner Yisrael in Baltimore, gave a series of shiurim over the telephone on tefillah, like on the going through davening. And they typed them up. One of his students worked them over and wrote them up, and then he said he went over it a lot in English, called She'e Nivi. It's written in English, though. The whole thing is in English. And it goes through the davening. So one thing he says is that how much you really love something is hard to gauge. But if that's what you really want for your children, then that shows how much you really love something. And that's why it's in there. In other words, loving the Torah is only meaningful. We only know you really love it if it's something you want for your children. If it's something you want for yourself or not, it's less. I'll explain why. In other words, let's say you have a person who really wants for his children to be observant and to be Talmidei Chachamim and to be, but he himself doesn't do it. So why not? So the answer is that we have Yetzer Hara. So I have a Yetzer Hara to keep sleeping and not wake up on time. But I have no Yetzer Hara for my kid. You understand? Now, this is a very important thing. Parents can often have a very hard time understanding their children because of this. Why don't you do what's right? Why don't you get... Now, for me, I have no question about that because I have a Yetzer Hara for myself. So sometimes it can be easy to be very tough on children because we have no Yetzer Hara for them. We just want what's best for them. Right? And we have there's no internal desire making me want them to sleep late or them to goof off, right? But so that itself is a good thing to remember. Like, you're also a person, they also have challenges, just like you and I, right? But on the other side of the coin, you have no Yetzer Hara for your kids at all. You don't want that. So in your own life, you might give in sometimes. But what you really want for your children, right, in a certain way, it tells you more about a person than even what they want for themselves. Because what they want for themselves might be mixed in with Yetzer Hara. It might be mixed in with the fact that they're trying to take the easy road. But for your kids, you have no interest in that. You just want them to live the maximum, most wonderful life. And so if that means Torah and mitzvos and tefillah and everything else, so then you're going to want that for them. You're going to dream about that for them. And so that's why that's in the bracha of Birkas HaTorah. In other words, what your values are and what you really think is important is key. The greatest danger is leitzanus. Leitzanus is cynicism. It's not like a leitzan, like a clown, right? It's not the leitzanut is cynicism where there's basically no way to fix such a person. The reason Amalek has to be completely destroyed is because there are lets. Let's taka, and therefore Acharito Adeova, Amalek is ultimately destroyed. All the rest of the nations are going to acknowledge Hashem Echad one day. It says Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Rashi says the translation is Hashem Shehu Elokeinu Ata, V'lo Elokei Ha'ovdei Kochavim. God, who is our God presently, but not the God of people who worship other gods. Who Atid Lihiyot Hashem Echad. One day is going to be the one and only God to everyone, and everyone's going to acknowledge Hashem, except Amalek. Acharito Adeova, they have to be destroyed. Why? Because when somebody is cynical, what are you going to do? You're going to tell them the most beautiful things. I don't know. I think maybe the rabbis made all this stuff up, and the whole Judaism is not. There's nothing you can do. If you have had a student like this, you had a friend like that. There's nothing you can do until the person can shed the cynicism. Now, the Rambam believes that anyone from Amalek can accept the Noahide laws and accept to live at peace with the Jewish people and so forth, and then they're not Amalek anymore. You have to kill them. You can get rid of the cynicism, but if you cling to the cynicism, there's no hope. In a room full of people, if you have a classroom, right? In my experience is the number one thing you have to do if you want to reach people that are maybe not so connected is make sure there's not any tone of cynicism or this kind of like intense skepticism is going to laugh off anything, because then you could teach the most beautiful Torah for an hour and one person goes, make some noise, make some laugh, make some chuckle, and it's gone from everyone in the room. Leitzanos is so dangerous because it takes something valuable and it makes it, and therefore the trick is to not allow it in at all. In other words, I've seen this in Jewish high schools. I've seen it where a kid will ask a question and say, Rabbi, I think wearing a kippah is stupid. Rabbi, I think modesty and all this thing about covering your elbows is such a stupid. Don't answer. Never answer. Don't. What I've done in my experience, the only thing that I've done that has been made that into a successful conversation is to say, like, that's not an appropriate way to ask a question, and I won't even relate to it. I'm willing, if you're interested in asking the question in a respectful way, and I'll give you an example of what would be a respectful way, right? Then we can talk about it. But otherwise, I'm not willing. There's no way that if you set yourself up as this 10th grader is an atheist, and I'll be the defender of religion to this person. That is not the role that ever has worked. So what's the solution? It's really very straightforward. The same kid who asked about, I think wearing a kippah. Let's say it like this. I understand there's a Jewish tradition to cover your head. And Rabbi, I can even see certain valuable things about it. After all, it reminds a person in the street. It sets them apart as a loyal Jew, a proud Jew. I could see a value to that, right? Can you? I mean, you might not want to do it. You might think it's not so important, but can you see why there's some of that? Good. So the way to phrase the question is to say, I do understand something about it. And I do see something about it, but I still feel that it's not so important. I think it's just a custom. I'd like you to explain to me why it's so important in Judaism, when to me I wouldn't think so. But in other words, the question, when phrased in a respectful way and not a cynical way, can be addressed. We can then walk away, even saying, maybe you don't fully understand it at this stage. Maybe you don't understand it ever in your life. But you had a conversation. You could be enlightened by it. There's no hope for that. That's Leitzanos. That's the danger of Amalek. They say, listen, as long as we attack the Jews, we might lose, but it doesn't matter. We've taken them down a notch. And if we take them down a notch, right, then everything changes in the world. Then everything changes for us. And so the koach of Leitzanos, right, of undermining, of undercutting, is so strong. I know there was a rabbi who once made a shiur years ago in LA, 40 years ago. He called it the Cynics class. And he was a very successful rabbi in outreach. So he decided he was going to take these like 10 brilliant, like Russian physicists and people. And he was as brilliant as any of them. And he knew just as much. He knew about he knew what he was talking about. And he made a class with them. But it was just them for years. And they called it like the Cynics class. And he was saying, like, I'm going to show you beyond a shadow of a doubt that there's Torah, whatever. And I think he did. I think he was really successful at teaching good Torah, and none of them changed at all. None of them. I know like 3 or 4 of the people who went to that class and where they are now. One of them recently had a child who intermarried. There was a Mickey Mouse conversion, but it was not, like what recently. And it's a very heartbreaking story. But on the other hand, creating that environment of what do we respect in our family, in our house, in other words, what do we speak about with respect? How do we relate to other Jews, tzaddikim, right? What is the thing? When a rich person comes in, are our children really excited? Or when a tzaddik comes in, do they know the names of any of the important, right, great Rosh Hashivas or tzaddikim? Do they even know who these people are? Would they recognize a picture of them? I mean, they certainly knew all the, right? Russell Wilson, everybody knew that he was traded today, right? I mean, everybody was talking about it. I mean, that's, would any of them know the names of the important personalities? You say, well, we're not Haredi. Okay. Do they know of Dov Lior? Do they know of Herschel Schachter? Would they recognize the person out of a lineup? In other words, is there any, or are we not doing a good enough job sometimes in really praising? And the truth is, it's hard because we're far from them. So, but there's so much of this. What's on the wall in our house? Who are the people that we look up to? Like, this is the definition of a person, is what do they really, really admire? Who are the heroes in the society? I want to tell you something amazing about this. There is a Gemara that says that there were 10 measures. The Gemara says a bunch of things there. It says 10 measures of beauty were given to the world. 9 were taken by Jerusalem and only 1. The whole rest of the world has 1, and Jerusalem has 9 times as much as the whole rest of the world combined when it comes to Yofi. It says conversation, effective communication. 10 measures were given to the world. 9 were taken by women and 1 by men. Yeah? So they have 9 times as much to say. I mean, right? Then it says, it's a beautiful Gemara. Then the Gemara says something really, really, really astonishing. It says there were 10 measures of sexual immorality given to the world. 9 were taken by the Arabs, and 1 was given to the rest of the world combined. The Arabs, where they, if the religion, I mean, they're covering everything but the eyeballs. I mean, you think the mask mandate's over? Not in Pakistan, right? It never even, right? They never even had to start that for the women, right? I mean, what a unbelievable statement. When in Western world, in the United States of America, you can't let your children see a billboard because it's pornography, right? Because what's on TV, available to everyone on their phones at the youngest age, is the most egregious stuff. And then you go over to these countries, and they'll chop your hand off for being caught grinning. I mean, never. That is right. How do you say it's 9/10? So you say, well, behind closed doors, they do terrible things to the camel. Whatever you say is going on with these people, could it be worse than what exists in the Western world, in France, in America? Here's the answer. I think the answer is what Rabbeinu Yonah said. It doesn't matter so much what you do. It matters what you believe. So go to all these people, religious, righteous guy in his madrasa, and say, what happens when you go to heaven? He says, heaven? We call it the great brothel in the sky. Right? That's what they believe. In other words, the experience of heaven is arayot. That's it. What do we talk about? We talk about a great big base medrash, people learning Torah together. There's no eating, there's no drinking. I mean, it's hard for us to even understand why somebody would want to go there. Like, you have to be very righteous already. He said, there's no eating, there's no drink. What am I going to do? Like, that's the one thing I like, But the answer is, we understand there's something higher than all that stuff. A religion, what you think heaven is, tells me a heck of a lot about you. Even if you don't do anything wrong your whole life, those are your values. That's what you're teaching your children. So you have a guy, I mean, you can only imagine, right? Some guy who's religious, and he wants to do a mitzvah. He wants to help an old lady across the street to get to the shuk or something. So he helps her, and he's like hoping that God will give him a great reward. Like, maybe one of the women that he's with won't have copious amounts of facial hair or something. That'd be great, right? Like, that's what he's thinking about. What he's thinking about in his head at all moments is getting to this one destination. And it's filthy. So that's 9/10. Does it make sense? In other words, where you're headed, what you really believe, what you really think is important, that's much more defining about who you are, even than behavior. In fact, the Gemara says that whenever Esther went to Achashverosh, and she was intimate with him, the Gemara says a shade, which means a demon, a sheda, took her place. So she wasn't there at all. That's what the Gemara says. Mefarshim explain, or Moshe Weinberger says, Mefarshim explain, it doesn't necessarily have to be understood to mean that it was physically a demon. But in other words, she was so emotionally removed and disconnected from this experience that it wasn't her, to the point that there's right? I mean, she was there, but she wasn't there. It was like something else was there. It was like it was happening in an imagination. That's a very significant idea, that a person can live in this world and be almost disconnected from their behavior. And a person can live and be completely involved in their behavior. And so that's the last time we had a share here, but it's something that's so important for the positive. How often, think about this. This is what I've been thinking about it since the last time. How often do we do almost anything with all of our heart? With all your heart. Kissing your children, just with all your, without any other distraction, just having that experience with all your, and just mindfulness, just 100% in on something. It's very unusual. It's very unusual. It's like once in a lifetime. This is what makes things like walking children down the aisle and these moments so significant to people. Why not create moments like that on a daily basis? And the answer really is with a lot of preparation and a lot of thought and a lot of focus, people are able to make really significant moments out of something. But the truth is, on a regular basis, what you believe, what you think is important, is very defining as to where you are. Okay, so now there's one more thing that I want to throw into this mix. The Gemara says that when Esther, and this is an amazing conversation I had this week. I used this Gemara and this teaching from the Satmar Rebbe to have a really interesting conversation I'll tell you about. Let me tell you the Gemara, the Satmar Rebbe. The Gemara says that when Esther said, Ish tsar ve'oyev, the man is dastardly, he's an enemy. And then she said, Haman hara, this evil Haman. And she pointed to Haman. The Gemara says she started pointing at Achashverosh. She was going to say, Ish tsar ve'oyev Achashverosh. But a malach came and pushed her hand towards Haman, and she said Haman. And the Satmar Rebbe says, all the Mefarshim say, what's going on? Though obviously the purpose here was to go to Achashverosh, get Haman killed. Why would she say, Achashverosh, it's all your fault? Why would she do that? It doesn't make any sense. She says, because she sensed in herself that the redemption was near. Geula means you can tell the truth. It means you say, Achashverosh, this is all your fault. It's not Haman. He's not the king. It's your fault. You did this. You gave him power. You gave him your ring. You went along with his plans. It's your fault and you're responsible. You can't talk like that to somebody. Even the whole book of Esther, Akati Avde Achashverosh Anan. It was written with Achashverosh still in power. So it never says anything openly negative about him. It's all hinted to. Right? It doesn't really say clearly that Esther was married to Mordechai because that wouldn't have been, Achashverosh wouldn't allow that to go in. It was written in a way where the truth is there, but it's very hidden. You couldn't say the truth explicitly. Esther couldn't say the truth. She couldn't just turn to Achashverosh and say, hey, but that is not what you do when you're still slave to Achashverosh. And therefore the angel had to push her hand. So what I spoke about with the 12th grade girls is how often do they feel this way? In a Jewish school, in a Jewish world, how often do they feel like they just can't say what they actually think? Like you just can't actually admit what you think about politics, about anything in the world, right? You just have to say other things. You have to ignore them. You have to try not to speak up. You have to be very respectful about nonsense. How often can you just say what we really believe? It's a big challenge. That's a big challenge. I think that this is so that was it was like an interesting conversation of, you'd be surprised at how cognizant a kid who's raised in an Orthodox family, going to an Orthodox shul and going to Orthodox schools, realizes that they're completely estranged from everyone in the world around them. They're watching TV, they're part of the world, and they know they're secular studies teachers, they're around people on a regular basis, on a day-to-day basis, where they just can't say things like, we really believe that marriage is between a male and a female. Just can't ever say such a thing in your life. And if you would, you're finished. You'll lose your job. You'll lose your teacher will fail you. This will become an issue in your life. Is that remarkable that this is still going on? And the Satmar Rebbe is learning that's part of what it means to be in exile. So this demonstrates how enormously challenging a task it is for us to create homes and communities where what's really true is elevated and what's really false is completely and utterly disdained. And it has to be that way. There has to be that clarity. There has to be that. But it's difficult. This is I'm not glossing over how incredibly difficult such a thing is when you have a society where these things sort of have to be kept under close wraps. You have to be very careful how you talk about things. So there's one thing that I think within the story of the Megillah goes like this. Kimu v'kiblu haYehudim. The Jewish people renewed their commitment to Torah, and the Gemara says they went back to Har Sinai, essentially. At Har Sinai, they accepted the Torah, and they reinvigorated and recommitted like they had at Sinai. Kimu v'kiblu, kimu b'asher kiblu kvar. So, that's a really big statement. What we believe today, if you go back 400 years, you go back 300 years, right? When George Washington is there, right? And you got the Vilna Gaon, and you got the Balatanya, right? You got the Baal Shem Tov a little before that, right? If we would sit with them, we believe the same stuff. We believe the same things. There's no meaningful difference between what we believe and what they believe. And you go back another 600 years before that to the Rambam, or another, right, to Rashi, right, 1,000, 1,100. You'd say, if you could talk to him, we speak Hebrew together. We believe the same things. And you go back another 1,000 years to Rabbi Akiva, right, and back. It's the same stuff. In other words, I don't know that there's other people in the world who have this. In other words, yes, it can feel completely alienating when you stand in the world and everyone looks at you and says, are you nuts? You actually believe that thing you're saying about whatever the subject is, right? And the answer is like, we've been here a long time, right? Since the giving of the Torah, it just hasn't changed. It hasn't changed. This is a really important attitude that we have to give over, that there's a strong sense of cynicism, of really, are you from the Middle Ages? I mean, I remember seeing this on Israeli television. Someone sent me a clip of a fellow, right, Chaver Knesset Smotrich. You know who this guy is? Smotrich. So he's a member of the Knesset. Okay, so he's on a news show, and they're asking him, Hishtagata, are you completely insane? You're a member of the Knesset, and you're talking about Mashiach, and you're talking about Hashem. And he's like, my ma'olam, my metziut. Like, what about the world? What about the real world? What about actual things? Like, I don't understand. You're here talking about the chosen people, and you're talking about the land of Israel and God, and like, what are you just crazy? You understand? And like, they couldn't understand. It was just total cynicism. And he's like, but I'm a Jew. And like, yes, these are the things that are axiomatic and fundamental to my belief. And like, he's well-spoken and he's a good sport. But like, I'll never forget it. I mean, it was a few years ago that I saw this thing. And it was like, they're looking at him and saying, are you mad? And that's just, no. But for 2,000 years, they've been saying this, are you mad? And it's about this, or it's about that, or it's about the next thing. And 3,000 years, 4,000 years, the reason that the Goyim fight us and hate us, the Gemara says, is because Sinai, the word Sinai, which is giving of the Torah, is Sheyarda Sin'a Le'umot Ha'olam. Hatred, Sinai, which is related to the word hatred. Hatred came to the nations of the world when the Torah was given at Sinai. In other words, as long as you cling loyally to the Torah, that's the thing that they've been hating so consistently. And that's not going to change. We're not going to let go of the Torah. We're not going to let go of these things. And so I think that that's the strongest possible response. I mean, I think we have to strategize about this. How do we, in our own homes, increase who are these great people? When big tzaddikim live and they die, like there are full communities where whole generation of kids were all named Avram Yishaya because they all were born. Everybody who had a baby boy the year the Chazon Ish died. There are whole communities in Israel where hundreds of little boys are named Ovadia. A cousin, they named Ovadia Yosef because that's actually what his name was. His name actually at birth was Ovadia Yosef. It wasn't his last name. And later it became his last name legally, whatever. And so his kids got the name Yosef as like a last name, but at birth, right? So the kid's named Ovadia Yosef, But the idea that like, are we doing that well? Are we creating, children, communities, homes? This is really important. And at any moment we can improve on this, right? Like, are we building the the ideals, not necessarily through the behavior that we understand to do, and that everybody's trying with, and that's an important thing to focus on too. But in terms of what do we praise, what do we admire, what's really considered important in our lives, um, and and I think that we shouldn't make the mistake of putting anything too high in a pedestal that we don't really value either. There's a time to speak and there's a time not to speak, but it's entirely okay to make a mockery and to make fun and to make jokes, right? And to belittle the Hamans and the other people in the world. They deserve it, and we need that. It's such a powerful tool to belittle kedusha, and so we have to avoid that so tremendously. But it's such an enormous. One good joke, one good line can just completely destroy a whole way of thinking for someone, right? And therefore, if you can use that correctly, right? If you can use that, person says, I never looked at that the same again. I never looked at the Kardashians, right? Whatever the thing is that you can knock, that you can make it seem silly, that's very valuable. It's very, very important. And I think therefore going through the Purim story as well, like you see that our sages were very clear about this. Haman walking around with diarrhea on his head from his daughter, and all, it's very important. And it goes in to explain how did she get the diarrhea, and that's why she always had the bedpan. That's fantastic stuff. And like it's important for us to be able to laugh about that with our children and be able to realize that like Haman was all about destroying the Jews, and he was actually God's shliach to get rid of himself. Every single thing that he did to get rid of the Jews, the pure evil that existed in the world was actually not evil at all. It was Hashem using him to build gallows for himself so that he could be destroyed. You understand? In other words, it's not just that the evil disappeared. It's that Hashem showed us that he was running the show to begin with. The joke is so on him, right? It's so funny. It's so silly. It's so outrageous. And that is supposed to be, I think, part of the joy and the silliness and the goofiness of Purim is to mock the stupidity and the meaninglessness of the small things in this world that just are evil, that are wrong, that are bad, and look at that and say it's so silly, it's so backwards, it's so upside down. They've got it completely wrong, and it's always been that way. Just like back in the day. It's like back in the day when people worshipped the Avodah Zarah and they marched in parades and they chanted down the street and they all believed in some sort of fake idol, which is totally false. The exact same thing has been consistently happening all through history, right? And it's just our job to sit by on the sides and say, look at these idiots. Look at these idiots. Eliyahu on Har Carmel, do you remember this? Saying, where's your God, huh? Did he fall asleep? Maybe he had to go to the bathroom. This is what Eliyahu says in the Psukim, right? Where is he? Maybe he got tired and took a little nap, right? I mean, he's just poking fun. He's making that is the win. That's the big win. Show how stupid it is. Show how silly it is. A list of philosophical proofs is not going to be as sharp as, so your God fell, I guess your God has probably had some bad sushi and is on the toilet. That is so much more powerful and so much more, and therefore there's an opportunity here when it comes to Purim, when it comes to wiping out Amalek. Wiping out Amalek means not allowing these forces that choose to take that which is good in the world, that which is noble, that which is holy, and make it look ancient and silly and backwards, right? Don't allow that to happen. Yeah, don't allow it to happen. Make sure that instead, what really is eternal, what really is meaningful, what has always been around and is always going to be there, is to us at the highest level. Those people, those svarim, those behaviors, right? That community of Jewish people. I mean, this is everything. And I think that with this perspective and a little bit of a focus on this, the koach hahilul, right, praising the right things, and the koach hahilul, and the koach hachilul, right, the koach of belittling what needs to be belittled, of pushing to the side that which is stupid and ridiculous and absurd, right, and belongs on Melrose and wherever else, right, and it's just not for the base medrash, right, like that's the season. That's what's happening with Parsha Zachor, with Purim. So listen, I wish everybody tremendous success. And if you get any good jokes or good material about any of these religions, send them my way.